The canyon walls echoed with a woman's desperate scream as Mason Edwards spotted her clinging to a narrow ledge 60 feet below the rim, her fingers white against the red rock that would soon claim her life if he did not act fast. He had been riding his bay gelding along the edge of Palo Duro Canyon in the Texas Panhandle that scorching afternoon in July of 1878, checking fence lines on the northern edge of his property, when he heard that sound. Without hesitation, Mason swung down from his horse and approached the canyon edge carefully, his worn boots finding purchase on the crumbling sandstone. The woman below wore traditional Apache clothing, her long black hair whipping in the wind that howled through the canyon like a living thing. "Hold on," Mason called down to her in English, then repeated it in the limited Apache he had learned from trading with peaceful bands over the years. "I am coming for you." The woman looked up at him with dark eyes full of terror and exhaustion. Her fingers were slipping. Mason could see scrapes and blood on her arms where she had clearly fallen or climbed down from somewhere higher. He did not have time to wonder what had brought her to this desperate situation. He only knew that every second counted. Mason ran back to his horse and grabbed his longest rope, the one he used for pulling cattle from mud holes and gullies. He tied one end securely around a sturdy juniper tree that had somehow found life in this harsh landscape, then wrapped the other end around his waist and over his shoulder. At 26 years old, Mason was strong from years of ranch work, but he knew this would test every bit of his strength. "I am lowering a rope," he shouted down to her. "Can you grab it?" The woman nodded weakly. Mason began his descent, using his boots against the canyon wall and letting the rope slide through his gloved hands in controlled movements. The sun beat down mercilessly and sweat poured into his eyes, but he kept going. 20 feet down, 30 feet, 40 feet. The ledge she clung to seemed to grow no closer, as if the canyon itself were stretching to keep them apart. Finally, he reached a wider ledge about 15 feet above her. He braced himself and called down, "I am going to throw you another rope. Tie it around your waist." He pulled the spare rope from where he had looped it across his chest and carefully lowered it to her. The woman's hands were shaking so badly that it took 3 attempts before she managed to grasp it. Mason watched, his heart pounding as she struggled to tie it around herself. Her movements were clumsy with fear and exhaustion, but finally she secured it with a knot that looked solid enough. "Good," Mason said, forcing his voice to sound calm and confident. "Now I am going to pull you up. You need to walk your feet up the wall if you can. If you cannot, just hold on tight." He began to haul on the rope, hand over hand, his shoulders burning with the effort. The woman weighed less than a full-grown steer, but the angle was awkward and the rope kept wanting to swing her into the rock face. She did her best to help, pushing off with her feet when she could find holds, but Mason could tell her strength was nearly gone. It seemed to take an eternity, but finally he pulled her up onto the ledge beside him. She collapsed against the rock wall, breathing in great gasping sobs. Up close, Mason could see she was young, probably around 20 or 21, with a beautiful face marked by cuts and bruises. Her dress was torn and her feet were bleeding through her moccasins. "Can you climb?" Mason asked gently. She looked up at him and spoke in Apache, her voice hoarse. Mason caught only some of the words, but he understood enough to know she was saying she would try. The climb back up was even harder than the descent. Mason went first, then braced himself to help pull her up behind him. Twice she slipped, and only the rope kept her from falling. By the time they both reached the top and collapsed on solid ground, Mason's arms felt like they were on fire, and his hands were raw even through his gloves. They lay there for several minutes, both breathing hard, staring up at the endless blue Texas sky. Finally, Mason sat up and looked at the woman. She was watching him with an expression that mixed gratitude, wariness, and exhaustion in equal measure. "My name is Mason," he said, pointing to himself. "Mason Edwards." She seemed to consider this, then spoke in careful, halting English. "I am called Fawn Josanie. You have saved my life, and I am in your debt." Her English surprised Mason, though he tried not to show it. "What happened to you? How did you end up on that ledge?" Fawn's face darkened, and she looked away. "I was running. Men from the settlement to the east, they came to our camp while the warriors were away hunting. They wanted to take some of our young women. I ran, but they chased me on horses. I thought if I went into the canyon they could not follow. I was wrong. I climbed down, trying to hide, but the rocks gave way beneath me." Mason felt anger rise in his chest. He knew which settlement she meant, a rough collection of drifters and troublemakers about 15 miles east. The law rarely reached that far, and the men who lived there operated by their own rules. "Those men, did they hurt you?" "They did not catch me," Fawn said, which was not quite an answer to his question. "But my people, I do not know if they are safe. I must return to them." Mason nodded and stood, offering her his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it and let him pull her to her feet. She swayed slightly, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "My ranch house is about an hour's ride south of here," Mason said. "You need water, food, and rest. Tomorrow I will help you find your people, but right now you can barely stand." Fawn looked like she wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her. She was dead on her feet, and they both knew it. "Your wife will not mind. I am not married," Mason said, "but I promise you will be safe. You have my word." Something in his eyes must have convinced her, because she nodded. Mason helped her up onto his horse, then swung up behind her. She stiffened at first, uncomfortable with the closeness, but as they began to ride, exhaustion won out and she sagged back against him. The ride to the ranch house gave Mason time to think. He had built his spread over the last 5 years, buying land cheap from folks who could not make it work in this harsh country. He ran cattle and horses, and he did it alone except during roundup when he hired on extra hands. It was a lonely life, but it was honest work and the land was his own. He had never brought a woman to his home before, certainly not an Apache woman who had just survived a harrowing escape and near-death experience. Tomorrow was going to be interesting, he thought. If her people came looking for her, they might not take kindly to finding her at a white man's ranch, no matter how innocent the circumstances. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today, he had saved a life, and that was enough. The sun was setting when they finally reached his property. The ranch house was modest, built of wood hauled from distant forests and stone pulled from the earth nearby. It had 2 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen and a separate bedroom. There was also a barn, a corral, and a small bunkhouse he used when he had hired help. Mason helped Fawn down from the horse and led her inside. He lit a lamp against the gathering darkness, then drew water from his well and heated it over the fire. While the water warmed, he pulled out bread, dried beef, and canned peaches, setting them on the table. "Please eat," he said. "I will step outside while you wash if you like. There are clean clothes in the trunk by the bed. They will be too big, but better than what you are wearing now." Fawn looked at him for a long moment, and Mason wondered what she was thinking. Finally, she spoke. "You are kind. This is not what I expected from a white man." The word stung, but Mason understood. He had seen how the Apache were treated, hunted, and driven from their lands. He did not agree with it, but he was just one man. "Not all of us are the same," he said quietly. "Just as I am sure not all Apache are the same." She nodded slowly. "This is true. I will remember this." Mason left her alone and went out to tend to his horse. He unsaddled the gelding, brushed him down, and made sure he had hay and water. The night was warm, and the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Fawn's people were probably worried sick about her. Or worse, maybe some of them had been captured or hurt by those men from the settlement. The thought made his jaw clench. He would help her get back to her people tomorrow, he decided. And maybe he would ride over to that settlement and have some words with whoever was causing trouble. He had no legal authority, but sometimes the threat of violence was enough to make bad men think twice. When he returned to the house, Fawn had washed and changed into one of his old shirts and a pair of trousers she had cinched tight with a belt. Her hair was still damp, hanging loose down her back. She had eaten some of the food and was sitting at the table looking much more alert, though still tired. "Better?" Mason asked. "Much better," she said. "Thank you. You have been very generous." "You can sleep in the bed," Mason said. "I will sleep out here by the fire." Fawn shook her head. "You have already done too much. I can sleep here." "You are injured and exhausted," Mason said firmly. "The bed is more comfortable. I insist." They argued back and forth for a few more minutes, but finally Fawn relented. She disappeared into the bedroom, and Mason heard the ropes of the bed frame creak as she lay down. He added wood to the fire, then made himself a bedroll on the floor. It was not the first time he had slept on hard ground, and it would not be the last. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the night and thinking about the woman sleeping in his bed. She was beautiful, there was no denying that, but it was more than her appearance that intrigued him. There was a strength in her eyes, a determination that had kept her alive when most people would have given up and fallen to their death. Mason had been alone for a long time. He told himself he liked it that way, that he did not need anyone else. But lying there in the darkness, he had to admit that having another person in his home felt right in a way he had not expected. Eventually, he drifted off to sleep, exhausted from the day's events. He woke before dawn, as was his habit. The fire had burned down to coals, and the house was cool in the pre-dawn darkness. Mason quietly added wood to the fire and set about making coffee and breakfast. He was frying bacon when Fawn emerged from the bedroom, looking much better than she had the night before. "Good morning," Mason said. "How do you feel?" "Sore," Fawn admitted. "But much better. Thank you again for everything." They ate breakfast together as the sun rose, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink. Mason explained that he would ride with her to find her people, and Fawn described where her band had been camped. It was about 10 miles northwest, in a hidden valley that offered water and shelter. They were just finishing their meal when Mason heard something that made him freeze. Horses. Many horses, coming fast. He stood and moved to the window, peering out carefully. What he saw made his blood run cold. Coming across his land was what looked like the entire village Fawn had spoken of. There must have been 50 or 60 people, riding horses and leading pack animals. Warriors in the front, their faces painted, weapons ready. Behind them, elders and women and children. "Fawn," Mason said quietly, "I think your people found you." She came to the window and looked out, and her face lit up with relief and joy. "It is my village. They are safe." She rushed to the door, and Mason followed more cautiously. This could go very badly very quickly. He was one man, and there were at least 20 warriors in that group, all of whom probably thought he had taken Fawn prisoner or worse. Fawn ran out into the yard, calling out in Apache. The riders pulled up, and a man in the front, clearly a leader, slid from his horse and rushed to her. They embraced, and he spoke rapidly in Apache, checking her for injuries. Fawn pointed back at Mason and spoke urgently, gesturing. The leader looked at Mason with hard eyes, assessing him. Mason stood his ground, his hands carefully away from his gun. He had no desire to die this morning, but he would not show fear either. Finally, The leader walked toward him. He was older than Mason, probably in his 40s, with gray threading through his black hair. His face was weathered but strong, and he moved with the confidence of a man who had led people through hard times. Fawn followed, speaking rapidly in a mix of Apache and English. "This is Mason Edwards," she said. "He saved my life yesterday. He pulled me from the canyon when I had fallen. He gave me shelter and food and safety. He was going to help me find you today." The leader studied Mason for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his English was better than Fawn's. "I am Red Sky, headman of our band. My daughter tells me you risked your life to save hers. Is this true?" "I did what anyone should do," Mason said simply. "She was in trouble and I helped." Red Sky's eyes narrowed. "Not anyone. Most white men would have left her to die, or worse, they would have taken advantage of her helplessness. Why did you not do these things?" Mason met his gaze steadily. "Because those would have been evil things, and I try not to be an evil man. Your daughter needed help. I gave it. That is all." Something shifted in Red Sky's expression. He turned and spoke rapidly in Apache to the gathered people. Then he looked back at Mason. "We tracked Fawn's trail from where she fled the bad men. We found where you rescued her from the canyon. We saw the ropes, the marks in the earth where you pulled her up. This was a brave thing, a difficult thing. You could have died yourself." "But I did not," Mason said, "and neither did she." "That is what matters." Red Sky nodded slowly. "You have given us a great gift. The life of the headman's daughter is precious beyond measure. We are in your debt." "There is no debt," Mason said. "I ask for nothing in return." "That is what makes you a man of honor," Red Sky said. "But honor demands that we offer something. Will you allow us to camp on your land tonight? We have been riding hard since yesterday, tracking Fawn. Our people are tired." Mason looked at the assembled group. There were indeed many tired faces, children drooping on horses, elderly people looking exhausted. He thought about his land, the good water on his property, the shelter his barn and outbuildings could provide. "Of course," he said, "you are welcome to camp here. There is a good spot by the creek, with trees for shade and grass for your horses. I will ask only that you respect my property and my livestock." "You have my word," Red Sky said solemnly. "We will leave your things untouched." Over the next few hours, Mason watched in fascination as the Apache village set up camp on his land. They moved with practiced efficiency, raising hide lodges and gathering wood for fires. The women began preparing food, and the children, recovering quickly from their tiredness, started playing games near the creek. Fawn stayed close to Mason, translating when needed and explaining things about her people. He learned that they were a peaceful band, one of the few still trying to live in the old ways while also maintaining good relations with nearby settlements. The men who had attacked their camp were a constant problem, raiders and troublemakers who saw the Apache as easy targets. "We cannot fight them without bringing down the army," Fawn explained. "If we kill white men, even bad white men, the soldiers will come and force us onto the reservation. So we run, we hide, we try to stay out of their way." Mason felt anger building inside him again. "That is not right. Those men broke the law. They should be the ones punished." "In a perfect world, yes," Fawn said sadly. "But this is not a perfect world. This is the world we have." As the day wore on, Mason found himself increasingly drawn into the life of the temporary village on his land. Children came to stare at him with wide eyes, giggling and running away when he smiled at them. Women nodded politely when they passed him. Warriors kept a careful distance, but their hostility had faded into neutral watchfulness. Red Sky invited Mason to share a meal with his family that evening. They sat around a fire, eating roasted venison and corn cakes, and Red Sky told stories of his people. Mason listened, fascinated. He had never had much contact with the Apache beyond brief trading encounters. Hearing Red Sky talk about their history, their beliefs, their way of life, he realized how little he had understood about them. Fawn sat across the fire from Mason, and he found his eyes drawn to her again and again. In the firelight, her face seemed to glow. She laughed at her father's stories, and the sound was like music. When their eyes met, she smiled, and Mason felt something stir in his chest that he had not felt in a very long time. After the meal, Red Sky pulled out a pipe and offered it to Mason. They smoked together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge overhead. Finally, Red Sky spoke. "You are a good man, Mason Edwards. I can see this clearly. You have shown kindness to my daughter and hospitality to my people. These are the marks of a man of character." "Thank you," Mason said. "Your people seem to be good people as well. I am glad I could help." Red Sky was quiet for a moment, then he said something that surprised Mason. "My daughter, Fawn, she is of marrying age. She has had many suitors among our people, but she has refused them all. She says they do not understand her heart. She wants someone who sees her as more than just a woman to cook and bear children. She wants a partner, someone who respects her mind and her spirit." Mason was not sure where this was going, but he felt his heart start to beat faster. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She is," Red Sky said, "and I can see the way she looks at you. I can also see the way you look at her." Mason felt heat rise in his face, glad for the darkness that hid his blush. "I have known her only a day." "Sometimes a day is enough," Red Sky said. "Sometimes you can know in an instant that a person is meant to be part of your life. I knew it with my wife, Fawn's mother, when I first saw her. She died 3 winters ago, and I miss her every day, but I am grateful for the years we had together." "I am sorry for your loss," Mason said sincerely. Red Sky nodded. "Life is short, Mason Edwards. When you find something precious, you should not let it slip away because of fear or doubt or what others might think. Remember this." With those words, Red Sky stood and walked back to his lodge, leaving Mason sitting alone by the fire. Mason's mind was racing. Was Red Sky giving him permission to court Fawn? Or was he just making an observation? And even if he was giving permission, what did Fawn think about it? Just because she had smiled at him did not mean she wanted anything more. Mason was so lost in thought that he did not hear Fawn approach until she sat down beside him. "My father likes you," she said simply. "This is a rare thing. He does not trust white men easily." "He is a wise man," Mason said. "I can see why your people follow him." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of the camp settling down for the night. Then Fawn spoke again, her voice soft. "I have not properly thanked you for saving my life. When I was on that ledge, I thought I was going to die. I had accepted it. And then I heard your voice, and you came down to me like an answer to a prayer. You did not have to do that. You could have ridden on." "Why did you not?" Mason thought about how to answer. "Because I could not live with myself if I had not tried. Some things are more important than safety or convenience. Doing what is right, that is one of those things." Fawn turned to look at him, and in the firelight her eyes were luminous. "You are not like other white men I have known." "I could say the same about you," Mason said. "You are not like other women I have known. You are brave and strong and intelligent. You survived something yesterday that would have killed most people." "I survived because of you," Fawn said. She reached out and took his hand, and Mason felt a jolt of electricity at her touch. "I will never forget that, and I will never forget you." Mason turned his hand to clasp hers properly. "I do not want you to forget me," he said, surprised by his own boldness. "In fact, I would like very much to see you again after your people leave." Fawn's face broke into a wide smile. I would like that also. Very much. They sat together by the fire for a long time, holding hands and talking quietly about their lives, their dreams, their hopes for the future. Mason told her about how he had come to Texas from Missouri, how he had built his ranch from nothing, how he sometimes felt lonely but free. Fawn told him about growing up in her village, learning the old ways from her grandmother, watching as more and more of their land was taken and their people forced to change. I am caught between two worlds, Fawn said. I know the old ways and I love them. But I also see that the world is changing. My father and the other elders, they hope we can hold on to our way of life, but I fear it is already too late. Soon we will all be forced onto reservations and then everything will be lost. Not everything, Mason said. Your spirit, your culture, your stories, those cannot be taken unless you let them be taken. As long as you remember who you are, as long as you pass that on to your children, nothing is truly lost. Fawn squeezed his hand. You give me hope, she said. I did not expect to find that today. Eventually, the fire burned low and the camp grew quiet. Fawn stood reluctantly. I should return to my father's lodge, but I will see you in the morning. I will be here, Mason promised. He watched her walk away, then sat alone with his thoughts for a while longer. Something had changed in his life today, something fundamental. He had woken up yesterday as a solitary rancher, content in his isolation. Now, less than 2 days later, he could not imagine going back to that loneliness. The thought of Fawn leaving tomorrow filled him with a hollow ache. Mason finally dragged himself to his bedroll in the house. He lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and thinking about dark eyes and a brave smile. When he woke the next morning, the camp was already stirring. Mason made coffee and stood on his porch, watching the Apache village come to life. It was like watching a well-oiled machine, everyone knowing their role and doing it without fuss. He admired their efficiency and their clear sense of community. Fawn found him there, carrying 2 tin cups. I thought you might like company for your morning coffee, she said. Always, Mason said with a smile. He poured coffee for both of them, and they stood side by side, sipping the hot, bitter liquid and watching the sunrise. We will be leaving soon, Fawn said, and Mason heard the sadness in her voice. My father wants to move our camp farther west, away from those bad men and their settlement. That is probably wise, Mason said, though the words felt like ashes in his mouth. Will you be safe there? Safe enough, Fawn said. For now, but who knows what the future will bring? Mason took a deep breath, gathering his courage. Fawn, last night you said you would like to see me again. Did you mean that? Yes, she said without hesitation. Very much so. Then I will come find you, Mason said. Wherever your people camp, I will visit if you will have me. I do not want yesterday to be the last time we see each other. Fawn turned to him and her eyes were shining. I was hoping you would say that. My father told me this morning that you would be welcome in our village any time. He says you are a friend to our people. I am a friend to you, Mason said. That is what matters most to me. Fawn set down her coffee cup and stepped closer to him. Mason Edwards, I barely know you, but I feel something when I am near you that I have never felt before. It is like my heart recognizes you, even though my mind says we are strangers. Is that foolish? If it is foolish, then we are both fools, Mason said, because I feel exactly the same way. She reached up and touched his face gently, running her fingers along his jaw. Mason held very still, hardly daring to breathe. Then Fawn rose up on her toes and kissed him softly. It was a gentle kiss, barely more than a brush of lips, but it sent fire through Mason's veins. When she pulled back, he could see that she was affected too. Her breathing quickened and her cheeks flushed. I will wait for you to visit, she said quietly. Do not make me wait too long. I will come as soon as I can, Mason promised. They stood together a while longer, neither wanting to move, neither wanting this moment to end. But finally, Red Sky called out for Fawn, and she had to go. Mason watched as the Apache village packed up with the same efficiency they had shown in setting up. Within 2 hours, every trace of their presence was gone except for the trampled grass and the cold fire circles. Red Sky came to say goodbye, clasping Mason's arm in a firm grip. "You will visit us?" Red Sky asked. "You will honor us with your presence." "I will," Mason said. "You have my word." "Good. My daughter would be sad if you did not come, and what makes my daughter sad makes me sad." Red Sky's eyes twinkled with amusement. "I think perhaps you understand what I am saying." "I believe I do," Mason said with a smile. Fawn was the last to say goodbye. She hugged Mason tightly, and he breathed in the scent of her hair, committing it to memory. 2 weeks, she whispered. "If you have not come in 2 weeks, I will think you have forgotten me." "Impossible," Mason said. "I could never forget you." She pulled back and smiled at him, then mounted her horse and rode off with her people. Mason stood watching until they disappeared over a rise. Then he was alone again with the wind and the grass and the endless Texas sky. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Mason's life. He threw himself into work, mending fences and checking his cattle and doing all the 100 tasks that running a ranch required. But no matter how busy he kept himself, his thoughts always drifted back to Fawn. He found himself talking to his horse about her, which would have been embarrassing if anyone had been around to hear. He told the gelding about her smile, her courage, the way her hand had felt in his. The horse seemed unimpressed, but Mason did not care. Finally, after 12 days that felt like 12 years, Mason decided he had waited long enough. He packed supplies for a week's journey, told his neighbor to the south to keep an eye on his property, and set out to find the Apache camp. Red Sky had described the general area where they would be, a valley with a spring and good hunting. It took Mason a day and a half of searching, but finally he spotted smoke in the distance and rode toward it. His heart was pounding as he approached the camp, hoping that Fawn had not changed her mind, hoping that she was as eager to see him as he was to see her. He need not have worried. As soon as he rode into view, children started shouting and pointing, and within moments Fawn came running out to meet him. She looked even more beautiful than he remembered, her face lit up with joy. Mason swung down from his horse, and Fawn threw herself into his arms. He caught her and spun her around, laughing, feeling lighter than he had in years. "You came," she said, breathless. "I was afraid you would not come." "I told you I would," Mason said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "I always keep my promises." The visit was wonderful. The Apache people, having accepted Mason as a friend, welcomed him warmly. He helped with camp chores, hunted with the men, and played with the children. But mostly, he spent time with Fawn. They walked together in the evening, talking about everything and nothing. She showed him how to identify edible plants and how to read animal tracks. He told her about his dreams of expanding his ranch, of building something that would last. On the 3rd night of his visit, they sat together on a hillside overlooking the camp, watching the stars emerge. Fawn leaned against Mason's shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her, feeling perfectly content. "I do not want you to leave," Fawn said quietly. "I do not want to leave either," Mason admitted. "But I have responsibilities, my ranch, my animals." "I know," Fawn said. "I am not asking you to stay forever, just wishing that you could." Mason was quiet for a moment, then he said, "What if you came with me?" Fawn sat up and looked at him in surprise. "Come with you, to your ranch?" "Yes," Mason said, the idea taking shape as he spoke. "Not forever, not right away. But for visits. You could spend time at my ranch and I could spend time here with your people. We could see if this feeling between us is real, if it can last." "It is real," Fawn said with certainty. "I know it is real." "I know it too," Mason said. "But your father, your people, they might not approve of you spending time alone with me at my ranch. It would not be proper." Fawn laughed. "Mason, we are Apache. We have different ideas about what is proper than white people do. Among my people, women are allowed to choose their own husbands. If I choose to spend time with you, getting to know you, my father will not object. In fact, he already suggested it." "He did?" Mason asked in surprise. "Yes. He said that if you came back, as he knew you would, I should spend time with you to see if we are truly suited for each other. He said that you seem like a good man, but that I should be certain before making any commitments." Mason felt a surge of gratitude toward Red Sky. "Your father is a wise and understanding man." "He is," Fawn agreed. "So yes, I will come to your ranch. I will visit you there, and you will visit me here, and we will see where this path leads us." They sealed the agreement with a kiss, longer and deeper than the first one had been. Mason felt like his heart might burst from happiness. Over the next several months, a pattern developed. Fawn would spend a week or two at Mason's ranch, learning about his life and helping with the work. Then she would return to her people for a while, and Mason would visit when he could. Slowly, they built a relationship based on trust and respect and growing love. Fawn proved to be remarkably capable at ranch work. She learned to help with the cattle, to mend fences, to handle all the daily tasks that kept the ranch running. Mason, in turn, learned more about Apache ways, their language and customs and beliefs. He came to see the world through Fawn's eyes, and it changed him. The local townspeople in the nearest settlement, a small place called Adobe Springs about 20 miles from his ranch, were not sure what to make of Mason's Apache visitor. Some looked at Fawn with suspicion or hostility. Others were simply curious. Mason made it clear that anyone who disrespected Fawn was not welcome on his property or in his life, and most people were smart enough to keep their opinions to themselves. There was one incident, about 4 months into their courtship, that tested Mason's resolve. He and Fawn had ridden into Adobe Springs to buy supplies. They were loading their purchases onto their pack horse when 3 men approached, clearly drunk even though it was only mid-afternoon. "Well, well," one of them said, a tall man with a scarred face. "Looks like Edwards has himself a pet Indian." Mason tensed, but Fawn put a hand on his arm. "Ignore them," she said quietly. "Good advice," the scarred man said. "Your kind should know their place. Maybe you should teach her some tricks, Edwards. I hear Indian women are good for certain things." Mason moved so fast that the men did not have time to react. He grabbed the scarred man by the shirt and slammed him against the wall of the general store. "You will apologize to the lady," Mason said in a voice that was all the more dangerous for being quiet. "Right now." The scarred man looked into Mason's eyes and saw something there that made him pale. "I apologize," he muttered. "Louder," Mason demanded. "I apologize." The man said more clearly. Mason released him and stepped back. "If I ever hear that you have spoken disrespectfully to her or any other woman again, I will come looking for you. Do you understand?" The 3 men nodded and hurried away. Mason turned to Fawn, worried that she might be upset, but she was smiling. "My fierce protector," she said. "Thank you. But I have dealt with worse than those fools." "I know you have," Mason said, "but that does not mean you should have to, not when I am here." They finished loading their supplies and rode back to the ranch. That evening, sitting together on the porch and watching the sun set, Fawn spoke. "I have been thinking," she said, "about us, about our future." Mason's heart started to beat faster. "What have you been thinking?" "I think that I want to spend my life with you," Fawn said simply. I have known many men, but none of them have made me feel the way you do. You see me as a partner and equal. You respect my people and my culture. You are kind and brave and honest. These are the qualities I want in a husband." "Husband," Mason repeated, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. Fawn turned to him. "Yes, husband, if you want me. I know that marrying an Apache woman will cause you problems. People will judge you. They will say cruel things. Your life would be easier if you married a white woman who fits into your world, so I will understand if you say no." Mason took both of her hands in his. "Fawn Josanie, from the moment I saw you on that canyon ledge, my life changed. Every day since then has been better because you are in it. I do not care what other people think or say. I only care about you. Yes, I want to marry you. I want it more than anything I have ever wanted." Fawn's face broke into a radiant smile. "Then I will marry you, Mason Edwards. I will be your wife, and you will be my husband, and we will build a life together." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, and Mason felt like the luckiest man alive. The next challenge was figuring out how to actually get married. Apache marriage customs were different from white customs, and neither Mason nor Fawn wanted to ignore either tradition. After much discussion with Red Sky and other tribal elders, they decided on a solution. They would have two ceremonies. First, a traditional Apache ceremony at the village, where Mason would present gifts to Fawn's family, and they would be joined according to Apache customs. Then, a few weeks later, they would have a Christian ceremony in Adobe Springs, making their marriage legal in the eyes of American law. The Apache ceremony took place on a crisp October morning in 1878. Mason had spent weeks gathering and preparing gifts for Fawn's family: horses, blankets, tools, and other valuable items. He presented them to Red Sky, who accepted them with solemn dignity. The ceremony itself was beautiful and meaningful. An elder spoke about the responsibilities of marriage, the importance of mutual respect and support. Mason and Fawn exchanged vows in both English and Apache, promising to honor and care for each other for all their days. When it was done, they were husband and wife in the eyes of Fawn's people. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days. There was feasting and dancing and storytelling. Mason danced with Fawn under the stars, holding her close and feeling like he was in a dream. The Christian ceremony in Adobe Springs was smaller and more subdued. The local minister agreed to marry them, though he clearly had reservations. A few of Mason's neighbors attended, more out of curiosity than friendship. But Mason did not care. He held Fawn's hand and repeated his vows, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, it felt just as binding as the Apache ceremony had. That evening they returned to the ranch, which was now officially their home together. Mason carried Fawn over the threshold, making her laugh, and they spent their first night as a married couple in the eyes of both their worlds. The first year of marriage was not always easy. They had to learn to live together, to navigate their different backgrounds and expectations. There were arguments, misunderstandings, moments of frustration. But through it all, their love remained strong. Fawn brought life and warmth to Mason's home. She decorated the house with beautiful woven blankets and pottery. She planted a garden that flourished in the harsh Texas soil, using knowledge passed down through generations. She also proved to be an excellent horsewoman and helped Mason train his horses. Mason, for his part, worked hard to learn more about Fawn's culture and language. He wanted to understand her world, to honor the heritage she came from. He also made sure that Fawn could visit her people regularly. Every few months, they would travel to the Apache camp and spend time with Red Sky and the rest of the band. These visits became more important as time went on. The Apache were facing increasing pressure from the government to move to reservations. Red Sky's band had so far avoided this fate by staying peaceful and out of the way, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time. In the spring of 1880, about a year and a half after their marriage, Fawn came to Mason with news that made his heart soar. "I am with child," she said, placing her hand on her still flat belly. "We are going to have a baby." Mason swept her into his arms, careful not to hold her too tightly. "This is wonderful news. The best news. How are you feeling? Are you well? Do you need anything?" Fawn laughed at his barrage of questions. "I am fine. Tired and a little sick in the mornings, but that is normal. My mother's sister, she is a midwife. I will visit the camp soon and talk to her about what to expect." The next few months were filled with preparation. Mason built a cradle from smooth oak wood, carving designs into it with painstaking care. Fawn sewed clothes from soft cloth and prepared the house for the arrival of a baby. They argued good-naturedly about names, Mason wanting to honor his parents and Fawn wanting to honor hers. In October of 1880, on a day when the leaves were turning gold and the air had a crisp edge, Fawn went into labor. Mason rode like the wind to fetch the Apache midwife, and she arrived just in time. The birth was long and difficult, and Mason spent hours pacing outside the bedroom door, terrified that something would go wrong. But finally, as the sun was setting, he heard the sharp cry of a newborn. The midwife opened the door and smiled. "You have a son," she said. "A strong, healthy son. Your wife wants to see you." Mason entered the room on shaking legs. Fawn lay in the bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up at Mason with tears in her eyes. "Come meet your son," she said. Mason approached carefully and looked down at the baby's face. He was perfect, with a dusting of dark hair and tiny fingers that curled into fists. As Mason watched, the baby opened his eyes, and Mason felt his heart expand to a size he had not known was possible. "He is beautiful," Mason said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are amazing. I love you both so much." They named the boy Matthew Samuel Edwards, giving him both of his grandfather's names. Matthew was Mason's father's name, and Samuel had been Fawn's father's name before he took the name Red Sky in an important ceremony. Red Sky came to visit a week later, and when he held his grandson for the first time, tears ran down his weathered face. "He is a bridge between two worlds," Red Sky said. "A symbol of hope. You have done a good thing, both of you." Life settled into a new rhythm with a baby in the house. Mason had never known he could be so exhausted and so happy at the same time. Little Matthew was a good baby, but he still woke them several times each night. Mason took turns with Fawn, walking the floor with Matthew in his arms, singing soft songs and telling him stories. As Matthew grew, he showed signs of both his heritages. He had his mother's dark hair and eyes, but his father's strong build. Fawn taught him Apache songs and words, while Mason taught him about ranching and horses. The boy was bright and curious, always asking questions and exploring everything he could reach. When Matthew was 2 years old, Fawn became pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy was easier. In the summer of 1883, she gave birth to a daughter they named Felicity June, honoring Fawn's mother, whose name meant something similar in Apache, and also Mason's mother, whose middle name had been June. With 2 children, the house was louder and more chaotic, but also fuller of love and laughter. Mason would sometimes stand in the doorway and watch Fawn playing with their children, and he would marvel at how lucky he was. But not everything was peaceful. The pressure on the Apache continued to increase. In 1883, the the government finally ordered Red Sky's band to move to a reservation in Oklahoma. It was presented as a choice, but everyone knew what would happen to those who refused. The day Red Sky came to tell them was one of the saddest of Mason's life. The old chief sat at their table, looking more tired and defeated than Mason had ever seen him. "We must go," Red Sky said. "If we resist, the soldiers will come. There will be killing. I cannot risk my people, especially the children. So we will go to this reservation and hope that we can preserve something of who we are." "Come here instead," Mason said impulsively. "There is room on my land. You could build a village right here. I would welcome it." Red Sky smiled sadly. "That is a generous offer, my son. But it would not work. The soldiers would force us to leave anyway, and they might take your land as punishment for harboring us. No, we must go. But I am grateful to know that there is at least one place in this world where we were welcome." Fawn was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. "Father, I do not want you to go. I do not want to be separated from my people." "You will visit us," Red Sky said firmly. "The reservation is far but not impossible to reach. You and Mason and the children, you will come to see us. And some of us will come to see you when we are allowed to leave. This is not an ending, my daughter. It is just a change." But they all knew it was more than that. It was the end of a way of life that had existed for thousands of years. The Apache band left a month later. Mason and Fawn stood on their porch with Matthew and baby Felicity, watching the long line of people and horses disappear into the distance. Fawn wept openly, and Mason held her, his own heart breaking for what her people were losing. Over the next few years, they did visit the reservation several times. It was a hard journey, taking nearly 2 weeks each way, but they made it work. What they found there was heartbreaking. The Apache, once a free and proud people, were confined to a small area, dependent on government rations that often did not arrive or were of terrible quality. Red Sky was still the leader of his band, but Mason could see that the life was draining from him. The old chief's hair had gone completely white, and he moved like a man much older than his years. Still, he welcomed them warmly each time they visited and treasured every moment with his grandchildren. On one visit when Matthew was 6 and Felicity was 4, Red Sky took Mason aside for a private conversation. "I am dying," he said bluntly. "My body tells me I do not have much time left." "No," Mason said, though he had suspected as much. "You are still strong. You will survive this place." "I have lived a long life," Red Sky said. "I have seen much, both good and bad. I am ready to join my ancestors, but before I go, I want to tell you something. When you pulled Fawn from that canyon, you saved more than just her life. You saved me too. My daughter is my heart, and without her, I would have had no reason to continue. You gave her a good life, a happy life. You have honored her and her people. For this, I will always be grateful." "You have given me more than I have given you," Mason said, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me your daughter, your trust, your friendship. You made me part of your family. I am the one who should be grateful." Red Sky clasped Mason's arm. "Then we are both blessed. That is a good way to end a friendship, with both parties feeling they received the greater gift." Red Sky died 3 months later. The news reached Mason and Fawn by letter from the reservation agent. Fawn grieved deeply, and Mason held her through the long nights when she cried for her father. They could not make it to the reservation in time for the burial, which added to her sorrow. But life went on as it always does. Matthew and Felicity grew, and in 1887 Fawn gave birth to another son, whom they named Robert Sky, honoring Red Sky's memory. The ranch prospered, and Mason became a respected figure in the area, known for his fairness and hard work. As the children grew older, Mason and Fawn made sure they understood both sides of their heritage. They learned Apache traditions and stories from Fawn, and they learned ranching and farming from Mason. They spoke both English and Apache at home, switching between languages as naturally as breathing. Matthew, the eldest, showed an aptitude for working with horses that amazed even Mason. By the time he was 12, he could break and train horses better than men twice his age. Felicity was more interested in learning, always asking questions and reading every book she could get her hands on. Little Robert was still too young to show clear interests, but he followed his older siblings everywhere, trying to do whatever they did. The family made one more trip to the reservation in 1889. Fawn wanted the children to meet more of her extended family and to see where some of the Apache people now lived. It was a difficult visit. The reservation was even more depressing than before, the people ground down by poverty and despair. But there were also moments of hope. They attended a ceremony where the old traditions were still honored. They heard stories told by the elders, keeping the Apache history alive. They saw children playing, laughing despite the hardships, showing the resilience of the human spirit. On the journey back home, Fawn was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "I have been thinking about my people, about their future. The old ways are dying, but maybe that does not mean the Apache themselves have to die. Maybe we can adapt, change, find new ways to keep our identity while living in this new world." "You have done that," Mason pointed out. "You have kept your Apache identity while also building a life here with me." "Yes," Fawn said. "And our children, they are both Apache and white. They bridge two worlds. Maybe that is the future. Not one culture or the other, but something new that honors both." Mason reached over and took her hand. "Whatever the future brings, we will face it together." As the years passed, that future began to take shape. Matthew, when he turned 18 in 1898, announced that he wanted to start his own horse breeding operation. Mason gave him land on the southern edge of the ranch, and Matthew built a house and corrals there. He was good at what he did, and soon people were coming from all over Texas to buy his horses. Matthew also fell in love with a young woman from Adobe Springs, a school teacher named Sarah Ellis. She was kind and intelligent, and she accepted Matthew's Apache heritage without judgment. They married in 1900, and Mason and Fawn became grandparents for the first time when Sarah gave birth to a baby girl in 1901. Felicity, true to her love of learning, became a teacher herself. She taught at a small school on the edge of the reservation, working with Apache children and trying to help them navigate between their traditional culture and the demands of the modern world. It was hard work, often frustrating, but Felicity threw herself into it with passion. Robert, the youngest, decided to follow in his father's footsteps and learn ranching. He worked alongside Mason, learning everything the older man could teach him. By the time Robert was 20 in 1907, Mason was starting to slow down. He was 55 years old, and the years of hard ranch work had taken their toll on his body. One evening, Mason and Fawn sat on their porch, as they had done thousands of times before. They were both older now, their hair graying, their bodies not as quick or strong as they once had been. But they were still together, still in love. "Do you ever regret it?" Fawn asked suddenly. "Marrying me, all the difficulties it brought." Mason looked at her in surprise. "Regret? Never, not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. These past 30 years with you have been the happiest of my life." "It has been 30 years," Fawn said wonderingly. "It seems like yesterday that you pulled me from that canyon, but also like a lifetime ago." "It was a lifetime ago," Mason said. "We were different people then. Younger, less certain of who we were and what we wanted, but I would not change anything. Every joy, every sorrow, every challenge we have faced together, it all led us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." Fawn leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Mason Edwards. I have loved you since the day you risked your life to save mine, and I will love you until the day I die." "And I love you," Mason said, kissing the top of her head. "More than words can express." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the Texas landscape they both loved. In the distance, they could hear Robert working with the horses. Closer by, they could hear the sounds of Matthew's growing family at their house down the road. Somewhere far away, Felicity was teaching children and making a difference in their lives. It had been a good life, Mason thought. Not an easy one, not without pain and loss and struggle, but a good one, built on love and respect and the courage to bridge two worlds. As if reading his thoughts, Fawn spoke again. "Do you remember what my father said that day when your entire village appeared on your land? He said I was a bridge between two worlds." "I remember," Mason said, "and he was right. You are a bridge, but so am I, and so are our children. We are all bridges, connecting past and future, different cultures and different ways of life." "Bridges are strong," Fawn said. "They have to be to support all that weight." "And we are strong," Mason said. "We have proven that." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Mason thought back to that day in July of 1878 when he had heard a scream echoing from the canyon. If he had been riding a different direction, if he had been just a few minutes later, he would have missed Fawn entirely. Their paths would never have crossed, and all of this, their marriage, their children, their life together, would never have existed. But he had been there. He had heard her. He had climbed down that canyon wall and pulled her to safety. And in doing so, he had saved not just her life, but his own in a way. Because the lonely cowboy he had been before Fawn was not really living, just existing. Fawn had taught him what it meant to truly live, to love, to be part of something larger than himself. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. Mason and Fawn watched their grandchildren grow, and then welcomed great-grandchildren. They saw the 20th century arrive, bringing with it automobiles and telephones and other marvels they could never have imagined in their youth. The ranch continued to thrive under Robert's management, and eventually Robert's own son joined him in running it. Matthew's horse operation became renowned throughout the state. Felicity eventually married a fellow teacher and continued her work with Apache children, making a real difference in many young lives. Through it all, Mason and Fawn remained the center of their family, the foundation on which everything else was built. Their love story became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The story of the cowboy who rescued the Apache woman from the canyon, and how her whole village appeared on his land the next day, and how from that beginning, a great love had grown. On a warm spring day in 1918, Mason passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 66 years old, and he died in the bed he had shared with Fawn for nearly 40 years, her hand clasped in his. Fawn grieved deeply for her husband, but she also celebrated the wonderful life they had shared together. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. In those years, she made sure that the Apache traditions and stories were passed down, that her descendants understood where they came from. She told them about her father, Red Sky, and his wisdom. She told them about the old ways, the time before the reservations, when her people had been free. But she also told them about Mason, about his kindness and courage, about how he had loved her completely and without reservation. She told them that love could bridge any divide, overcome any obstacle, if it was strong enough and true enough. Fawn passed away in her sleep in 1923 at the age of 66. As per her wishes, she was buried beside Mason on a hillside overlooking their ranch. The entire family gathered for the funeral, along with many Apache people who had traveled from the reservation to honor her memory. At the funeral, Matthew, now a man in his 40s with gray hair and his own grown children, spoke about his parents. "My father taught me that character matters more than the color of your skin or where you come from," he said. "My mother taught me that strength and gentleness can exist together, that holding onto your heritage while embracing change is not only possible but necessary. Together, they showed me what true love looks like. They were not perfect people. No one is, but they were perfect for each other." The family legacy continued through the generations. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down from father to son. Some of the descendants married other Apache people, keeping that connection strong. Others married people from different backgrounds, continuing the mixing of cultures that Mason and Fawn had begun. But all of them, no matter who they married or where they lived, carried with them the story of their ancestors. The story of a cowboy and an Apache woman who had defied expectations and overcome prejudice to build a life together. The story of a love that had started with a desperate rescue and grown into something that changed not just two lives, but the lives of everyone who came after them. Decades later, when historians began to write about the Old West, they focused mostly on gunfighters and outlaws, cavalry charges and Indian wars. They wrote about the violence and the conflict, the clash of cultures that often ended in tragedy. But there were other stories too, quieter stories that did not make the history books but were no less important. Stories of individuals from different worlds who found common ground, who chose love over hate, understanding over fear. Stories like Mason and Fawn's. Their great-great-granddaughter, a woman named Emily who was born in 1950, became a historian herself. She researched her family history extensively, collecting letters and documents and interviewing elderly relatives who still remembered stories told by those who had known Mason and Fawn personally. In 1985, Emily published a book about her ancestors, telling their story in detail. The book became popular, not because it was about famous people, but because it was about real people facing real challenges and overcoming them through love and determination. Readers saw in Mason and Fawn's story a reflection of America itself, a country built by people from many different backgrounds learning to live and work together. Their story was a reminder that despite all the conflict and division, despite all the injustice and pain, there had also been moments of connection and understanding. The ranch where Mason and Fawn had lived still stood, now operated by their great-great-great-grandchildren. They had turned part of it into a small museum, preserving the original house and displaying artifacts from Mason and Fawn's life. Visitors could see the rope Mason had used to rescue Fawn from the canyon, now old and frayed but carefully preserved. They could see Fawn's beautiful woven blankets and the cradle Mason had carved for their first child. But more than the objects, visitors came away with the story. The story of how love can triumph over prejudice, how courage can change lives, how two people from different worlds can create something beautiful together. On the hillside where Mason and Fawn were buried, their graves were marked by simple headstones. Mason's read, Mason Edwards, 1852-1918. Beloved husband, father, and grandfather, he lived with honor. Fawn's read, Fawn Josanie Edwards, 1857-1923. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she bridged two worlds. Between the two headstones, their descendants had planted a tree, an oak that had grown tall and strong over the years. In summer, it provided shade over the graves. In fall, its leaves turned brilliant colors. In winter, it stood bare but unbowed against the harsh Texas weather. And in spring, it burst into new life, green and vibrant. The tree, like their love, like their family, like their legacy, endured. And so the story of the cowboy who rescued an Apache woman from a canyon, and how her entire village appeared on his land the next day, and how from that unexpected beginning grew a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, became more than just a family story. It became a testament to what is possible when people choose love over fear, when they see each other as human beings rather than as representatives of different races or cultures. It was a story of the Old West, yes, but also a story for all times. Because the need to bridge divides, to find common ground, to choose love over hate, these needs are timeless. They are as relevant today as they were in 1878, when a young cowboy climbed down a canyon wall to save a woman he had never met, and in doing so, saved himself. That hot July day when Mason heard Fawn's scream echoing through the canyon had changed everything. If he had ridden a different path, if he had arrived 10 minutes later, if he had decided the risk was too great and had ridden for help instead of acting immediately, the story would have ended before it began. Fawn would have fallen to her death, and Mason would have continued his lonely existence on his ranch, never knowing what he had missed. But none of those things happened. He was there. He heard her. He acted. And from that one moment of courage, everything else flowed. The rescue. The appearance of her village on his land the next day. Their growing attraction to each other. Their courtship. Their marriage. Their children. Their grandchildren. All of it stemmed from that single decision to help someone in need. It was a reminder that our choices matter, that one moment of courage or kindness can ripple out in ways we can never predict, changing not just our own lives but the lives of countless others. Mason could never have imagined, as he lowered himself down that canyon wall, that he was beginning a story that would still be told more than a century later. He was just doing what he felt was right, and maybe that was the real lesson of the story. That doing what is right, acting with courage and compassion, loving without reservation, these things have power beyond our understanding. They create legacies that endure long after we are gone. The love between Mason Edwards and Fawn Josanie was such a legacy. It was born in a moment of crisis, tested by prejudice and hardship, strengthened by mutual respect and understanding, and endured until death parted them. And even then, it continued in their children and grandchildren and all who came after, a living testament to what two people can create when they choose love over everything else. On quiet evenings, when the sun sets over the Texas landscape, where Mason and Fawn lived and loved and raised their family, you can almost feel their presence still. In the wind that whispers through the grass, in the cry of a hawk soaring overhead, in the solid strength of the house they built together and the family they created. Their story was complete. Their love had triumphed, and their legacy would endure for generations to come, a bridge between worlds, a testament to courage, and a celebration of love that knew no boundaries.